Welcome to another OTD reaction video. This one is from the Armchair Historian. It's called D-Day from the Canadian Perspective, Bird's Eye View. I've watched this video before. I think I saw it when it came out initially and just rewatched it now. It's got lots of things I like, lots. There's some things I'm not such a big fan of, some cliches and some information that's just factually incorrect, just based on years of historiography and the like. So I can point those out as we move along. And I wanted to cover this now because I've been doing tons of reading for the Canada Normandy project, both primary sources and secondary, to look at all the experiences of Canadians in Normandy, but obviously, of course, on D-Day. So I think this is a good time to do it. So let's get into it. So it seems like there are two depictions of the famous Canada House, one from seemingly the day there on the left and how it would look today, and also just some beach defenses and the like, famous photos of Canada's D-Day. It looks like there's Canadian commanders on the wall as well. I really like this background. It's pretty cool. And there's the beach itself. What I think is Simmons there at the bottom. I'm not too sure. And Cruyar, I think, is coming up here in the background. I think that's supposed to be Harry Cruyar.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Were for the most part quickly overcome against relatively few casualties. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for the landing zones of the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division at Juno Beach. In our final episode in this series, we'll fly across the Juno sector from the bloody struggle for its seaside towns to the daring dash for Kapike Airfield and the Paris-Cherbourg railway line.
And there's the Canada House again, with the red ensign on there, not the big.
Stretching around 8 kilometers from Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer in the east to Courseulles-sur-Mer in the west, Juno Beach was situated in between the British sectors of Gold and Sword. Its most significant landmark was the Kapike Airfield, located some 17 kilometers inland just to the west of the city of Caen. Allied planners had made it a priority to expand Allied air superiority as soon as possible, and the capture of Kapike was deemed an important first step to achieve this goal.
So this is the first thing I want to stop and talk about here. How Kapike is presented here is that A, makes it sound like it's the super important objective, which yes, it is an important objective for the D-Day landings in the Juno sector, but also that it's needed to help cement Allied air superiority. That's just simply not the case. Kapike was not providing air cover for the Germans from here. It was too close to naval gunfire, well within range of the naval guns. So any aircraft on there are going to have a bad time because they'll just get hit with those heavy naval shells. But it is still the objective. One of the thoughts behind taking Kapike is that it would be able to be used for bringing in aircraft quickly from the Allied side for evacuating casualties and bringing in supplies and the like. Turns out that didn't really get to happen. Also, as it's noted here, Objective 1 says expand air superiority. They had been doing that for a long time prior to the landings, trying to expand the destruction, basically, of the German infrastructure, both for roads and railways, but also airfields and the like. So that was pretty much achieved well before the landings. And also that railway line, yes, of course, they want to sever any sort of logistical line, but again, that line was well within naval gunfire, so it's not necessarily the Germans' main supply routes or anything of the like. It was made as a good objective called the Oak Line for the troops to reach and then set up their brigade fortresses, as they're called.
The Canadian 3rd Infantry Division had been assigned to assault up the beach, seize the airfield.
So this little bubble thing's pretty cool, a little grid section there. It's pretty cool to see something like that. This is accurate. Canada has over 1 million at its highest point, people in uniform, which is just wild for a country of just over 11 million at the time. And that's amongst the 3 services, Army, Navy, Air Force. So Canada, of course, as said in both World Wars, really punches above its weight. And just a quick mention that's not mentioned in this video, again, not blaming them in any way, shape, or form, is there's a Canadian parachute battalion fighting under command of the British 6th Airborne Division, which you can see there marked by the Pegasus there up towards the Orne Canal.
And sever the Paris-Cherbourg railway
So that's
line.
the Oak Line.
If possible, the 3rd Infantry Division would also support a potential assault on Caen, with British forces
True.
advancing from
That's a
Sword
very
Beach.
low down the
Like
list
their
objective.
British comrades in arms, the Canadian invasion force would face units of the German 716th Static Infantry Division, which had positioned themselves in pillboxes and fortified houses in various fishing villages along the coast.
Yep.
The most formidable of these resistance nests were located in Bernières-sur-Mer and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, whose large vacation homes provided the defenders with excellent vantage points over the beach, while skillfully positioned.
So you can still visit some of these strong points today. Some of them are very obvious, some are been reduced, but they're a really interesting thing to see. So real quick, I just want to touch on something that's mentioned here. Is the strength of these defenses is undeniable at the time. Hardly defended beaches out there. So there's all kinds of concrete defenses and everything else that's shown up here in this animation. Mark Milner, who spent decades on this stuff, father was a Normandy vet, talks about how the defenses actually at Courseulles are stronger at certain points. There's lots of debate on what makes the strength of the beach defenses, what counts, what doesn't count. But it's just an interesting thing to note that he thinks that Courseulles is the strongest, literally strongest point, one of the resistance points, the Widerstands nest, I don't know if I said that right, of the German.
Gun emplacements could pick off approaching armor at range. Elsewhere, on-rails machine gun teams had the ability to rapidly reposition their heavy equipment.
And I think it's maybe part of the misunderstanding a lot that goes into the German defenses. So it made it sound like that the guns can pick off armor as it's coming in from the beach, I'm assuming. As you'll see in my project coming up, when I show the bunkers, they're not sighted facing out into the English Channel. They're sighted parallel to the shore. That's to provide enfilade fire to hit them from the side. Because if you put an open side towards the ocean, that's going to cause all kinds of problems for the defenders. But if you put it to the side, they can cause all kinds of issues for the people coming ashore and the armor. So, and that's what happens. They're not facing out. They're not hitting them as they're coming in. That's for other guns. That's not what's happening here. This is to hit the beach.
Equipment to suppress large sections of the beach. At dawn, the Allied Armada offshore opens fire on the German batteries and strongpoints in the Juno Beach sector, as the men of the Canadian 7th and 8th Brigades ready themselves to open the assault on the beach. At 7:30, the first landing craft set off.
Okay, so this is a little part that is just strange to me. They're showing the landing craft, particularly the landing craft assault, LCA, is firing on to the shore as they're coming in. That did not happen. The landing craft were not armed in that way. If troops had started to fire, which I've never read any accounts of them doing, it would have been wild and inaccurate because the sea was very rough that day. You've seen footage of this stuff. It's absolutely wild how rough the channel was even after the landing. It's not going to hit anything. You're having trouble standing up as it is in a landing craft full. When you're sitting down, particularly in the LCAs, you're not standing up like in the ubiquitous Higgins boats that you see in popular culture. Same with the LCTs that you see on shore there. They're not firing. What did happen, though, and is not mentioned here, is the field artillery that is coming into shore right behind the initial assault wave is firing on their way in. The effectiveness is minimal. Hard to hit something with a 25-pounder while you're coming in on rough shores, particularly beach defenses. That is the firing that you see on top of the support from units from the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy as well. But the landing craft are not firing on their way in.
Off from their assembly points, but the rough waters of the channel quickly slow the advance to the beach. The Germans, in the meantime, have suffered only minor damage from the opening bombardment as they prepare themselves to meet the first wave with withering fire. At around 7:50...
Okay, so I just want to go back here because something important is left out. So that's shown that the bombardment is starting at 6, right? The landings on Juno, and I did a video on this, and I'll link that down in the description so you can check it out after, is the landings at Juno are later. That's on purpose because in the video I made and from using maps of the day, there's shoals just offshore that they have to wait for the tide to come up so that these landing craft and those carrying the tanks can come in without bottoming out. They have to come in later. So just the way it's presented here, I know it's not mentioned in any way, looks like they are delayed by some force. They stay the channel. They're not delayed for that particular reason. Delayed on purpose as opposed to the other beaches because the bombardments basically started roughly the same time. and then they come in later. Yes, there was delays. There's always going to be delays and things like this, but the delay initially is on purpose.
At around 7:50,
Wait.
landing craft carrying engineer elements of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles are the first to.
So this is nitpicky, and I know that, and I'm not denying that. However, saying that the engineers from the Royal Winnipeg, that's not accurate. The engineers are their own branch, still are. They're from their own units. They're not Winnipegs, who are engineers. They're engineers landing with the Winnipegs. And they basically just fight as infantry because the initial waves are that difficult, particularly in these areas that are built up urban areas, which you can see. And when I talk about this in the videos coming up next year, or just in general on YouTube, there's lots out there that are really good. It's all urban, right? It's very difficult to take. So these engineers who are supposed to clear those obstacles that you see there and things like minefields and help to breach the seawall, can't do that at the initial stages of the landings. And another element that I'm sure someone will comment about if I don't mention it is that the British forces, the British Commonwealth forces landing in Normandy had armor, which is true. They did, but not all of them did. A lot of people like to, bash the Americans for not using armor with their engineers on the D-Day landings. Not every British Commonwealth engineer who's landing on D-Day is landing inside an armored vehicle. That's not what happened. Actually, most of those who attach to the armored vehicles are not in them. You can see this in all kinds of footage from them training. There's one, I think it's kind of funny because the guys are like having trouble. So it might have been an earlier part of the training is the tank flies out of the landing craft, no problem. And there's a bunch of dudes just running behind it. So, and one of them trips coming off the ramp. So it's not like all these engineers are protected. Yes, that's one of the lessons of the YEP, but that's not the case for every engineer that's landing at Juno Beach.
First to lower their ramps in the Mike sector near Courseulles-sur-Mer,
the Juno Beach Center
while delayed elements of the Queen's Own and Royal Regina Rifles are closing in further to the east in the Nan sector. Many of the amphibious duplex drive tanks of the 1st Hussars that were supposed to come ashore alongside the infantry faltered in the Channel waters, with only 14 arriving on the.
So this is one of the things that kind of bugs me about videos, books, whatever, on DA, is the duplex drive tanks. Admit my bias right now. 1st Hussars are from my hometown. I've done videos on them, particularly the DDs landing on D-Day. It's one of the first videos I ever did. Link that down below so you can check that out as well. Yes, most of them technically flounder in the water. Numeric majority of them don't make it for all kinds of reasons, not just because they flounder in the channel. Some are hit by enemy fire. Some have mechanical issues. One of the LCTs can't open its door. So they can't get out. And when they're supposed to come. So they're supposed to come just ahead of the infantry to deal with those strong points. Now, one thing that's not mentioned in here at all, and it makes it sound like they make no impact, which is not true. I found in the war diary of both the Hussars and the Winnipegs, the CEO of the Winnipegs talking about how the DDs make all the difference, not just on their sector, but for the Canadian Scottish, which is further to the west, who kind of get forgotten in most of videos and books about Canada and D-Day, unfortunately. But he says they make the difference in getting them in. So to say that the DDs don't work is not true at Juno. Obviously, there's issues at Omaha. I'm aware of that, and other parts of the British beaches as well. But to say that they don't make an impact or just move on quickly past them is not the case.
Lacking adequate armor support, the Winnipeg's men are mercilessly cut down by intense German fire.
Taking it a lot of heavy casualties.
Further to the west, other elements find the German strongpoints opposing them greatly weakened or already destroyed by the preliminary bombardment.
That's the Kansas.
After a brief firefight, the few remaining positions
there's
are
not many defenses over
as
that
the
way,
Canadians begin to advance inland. Further to the east, in the Nan sector, the Regina Rifles similarly managed to silence most of the initial German defenses in front of the Courseulles-sur-Mer in rapid succession, and by 8 o'clock, its men are already advancing into the town itself.
From the 1st Hussars.
Its abandoned vacation homes, however, provide ample opportunity for the Germans to transform its quaint streets into a veritable killing zone, forcing the Reginas to begin the time-consuming task of clearing out enemy snipers and makeshift strongpoints one by one. Just a few kilometers to the east, the Queen's Own Rifles are facing another type of nightmare in front of Bayonne-sur-Mer. Sandbars and other obstacles obstruct the way to the beach, forcing the Queen's Own to wait.
So right there is the sandbars, right there, very close. to the really high tide mark, if you want to say. It causes issues, right? They some of them hit them because they're later, so they're coming in and they don't know where they are. That was the whole point, right? Is they land over them, but they don't. The timing doesn't work. I mean, Charlie Martin, who wrote about this, part of the Queen Zone, talks about the issues of that and the timing and everything like that, and having to go into a little bit of water, same with others. And it causes major problems for the Queen Zone. They take a high number of casualties, and then they back up on the beach, which causes more casualties.
Through deep water before making a near suicidal dash.
This is the famous Canada House area.
83 meters of beach without armored support. Crossfire from several hidden German emplacements,
so these are the
including
emplacements
an 88mm gun, devastates the
They're
struggling
not firing
infantry.
out to shore, they're
Within a
firing
matter of minutes,
parallel
65 Canadian soldiers lay dead or wounded on the beach. On the far eastern end of Juno, elements of the North Shore Regiment, landing in front of Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, are faced with a similar predicament as ferocious fire coming from undamaged German positions atop the town's...
So there's some strong points in Saint-Aubin as well that you can still see today. Just quick aside, again, not holding them for not mentioning it, but that famous footage you see of the assault wave from D-Day that's used for everything is the North Shores. I've used it myself, talked about it, and we know who one of the soldiers was, the one who gets patted on the back and turns and looks at the soldier behind him. We know all about that stuff. So that's where that comes from. Just a quick aside.
Seawall annihilate the regiment's supporting tanks within a matter of minutes.
Yeah, the Fort Garry Horse have
the arrival of reinforcements changes the tide of battle at Bernières-sur-Mer as the decimated men of the Queen's Own manage to overcome the Germans and move into the town. While the infantry are finding ways to move inland, increasingly agitated tank crews are finding it impossible.
You can see the DDs kind of represented here. I assume that's supposed to be the canvas screen that covers them up. I have another video on that showing how it's done, which I thought was kind of cool because it's just a really cool technical video of how this was actually accomplished. So yeah, they come in, but yes, they run into issues because there's nowhere to go because the Queen Zone had suffered heavy casualties to get off the beach. So they're slowly working their way through Bernays and slowing the whole advance down. And that also is an issue because the engineers can't get through to remove these obstacles and deal with the seawall, which again slows the advance and it just backs up and backs up and backs up.
Possible to traverse the high curved seawall. As engineers race against time to create makeshift ramps and open other exits off the landing zone, the beach is quickly becoming congested with the incoming tide.
As you can see here,
advancing Canadian infantry are moving to outflank the last pockets of German resistance. Courseulles, Bernières, and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer all fall under Canadian control. By 10 o'clock, the advance southward is ready to...
So with Saint-Aubin, there's another thing I want to talk about is you can see how this is done in the photos that are taken that day. It's quite a famous photo of the North Shore coming around and attacking one of these strong points from the rear, from inside the town. It's quite a interesting photo, and I'll show it now. I'm recording this before. I'll show it here so you can take a quick look. But it's a fascinating photo and showing how those positions had to be taken.
Begin in earnest. Within an hour, the Québécois regiment stands outside the outskirts of Benny-sur-Mer, while follow-up waves equipped with bicycles.
So I have an issue here with calling it a Québécois regiment. I mean, technically, yes. That phrase is kind of a complicated one to use at the time in the 1940s because it's not really applied at the time. It's not really used in the sense of we think about it today. It doesn't really come kind of after the Quiet Revolution in the 1960s. Also, if you don't know much about the Canadian Army, it makes it sound like it's the only one. Well, shit, it's not. It's the only one to land on D-Day. There's others that come later. These are French-Canadian units predominantly. Those soldiers speak French. They operate in French. One of my relatives who's actually killed in that backup that you could see just a moment ago on the beach, on the same area as the Queen's Own, was part of the Chaudière. So they're not the only one. They're not called a Québécois unit at the time. It's usually just French speaking because French Canadian doesn't mean Quebec and Quebec doesn't mean French Canadian. It's a bit of a misnomer here and kind of brushes aside a very complicated thing. You could have just said French speaking and that would have been perfect.
Rush down to catch up with the vanguard. On the western flank, the Canadian, Scottish, and Winnipeg rifles link up in the marshes around Sainte-Croix-sur-Mer, while the Regina rifles...
So another thing is the bikes. You hear about the bikes a lot. They're in the famous photos of particularly the 9th Brigade, which is the reserve brigade, coming ashore with bikes. It's makes for a striking photo, makes for a good story. They are basically don't make much of a difference. The advance is slower than anticipated in terms of that. They thought the reserves were going to really need to move it to catch up with the advance that we're looking at here, because the 9th comes in later, which they don't end up having to do. They don't really need the bikes. They don't make much of a difference tactically. There's photos, you can see them literally dumping the bikes as soon as these troops get to the seawall. So they make next to no impact there.
Rifles and 1st Hussars advance towards the Revier. With their line broken, the defenders of the 716th Infantry Division are powerless to withstand the weight of the Canadian advance. With the fall of Benny-sur-Mer, the road to Capiquet Airfield and the Paris-Cherbourg railway line now lay wide open. However, just as follow-up units continue to advance southward, the eastern flank is attacked by elements of the 21st Panzer Division. Attempting to push the Allies back into the channel, the 21st's Panzers drive in between the Canadian and British lines toward the sea. The attack, however, fails to dislodge the Allies, and the
the
3rd
vanguards make
Division
some contact, but they
continue the advance in hopes of reaching their primary objectives before nightfall. Dashing ahead, elements of the 1st Hussars manage to sever the Con Bayou Highway, while the North Nova Scotia Highlanders and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers fight their way into the towns of Villon, Buisson, and Anizy. With the Canadians now a mere 5 kilometers away from the Capiquet airfield, its garrison panics and initiates a haphazard evacuation. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the 3rd Infantry Division receive orders to halt the advance and dig in for the night and prepare for another expected German counterattack.
Okay, so this is one of the things I take issue with this video. Makes, again, sound like the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division is the only one stopping their advance. That's not true. There's a general order across to all of the troops in the area, British as well, to hold positions and dig in. They're not hitting their objectives for that reason. Could they have kept pushing through the night? Yeah, probably. I mean, the night in Normandy at that time of year is not very long. But they don't. They take it the next day. And it really doesn't make much of a difference, in my opinion, on how these things go. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But I just want to jump in and say that it's not just the Canadians who are stopping their advance for seemingly unknown reasons. It's a command from up top to do it for all of them. I believe it's a Second Army command. The British Second Army, you can see there in the disc at the top. I believe it's coming from the higher ups. It has nothing to do with, 3rd Div saying we're done.
By the end of D-Day, the men of the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division had established a beachhead that stretched around 16 kilometers inland, which was further than any of the other beaches on the first day of the invasion.
So that is a point that's talked about all the time, right? Canadians advance the furthest in. He mentions it with the 1st Hussars who crossed that, that railway that he mentioned with that's known as the Oak Line in the planning documents. They cross that. They don't hold that position. They're ordered back. A lot of that has to do with Allied armored doctrine. You come back and what's called harbor. You hold a position and you dig in, sort of. And it's like a self-supporting defense system at nighttime. So they push back and reach with the rest of the regiment. So they don't hold that position. Yes, they make it far. They're the only ones to reach their objective. They don't hold the objective. That doesn't happen again until the next day. Like this happens early morning. All of those objectives are taken and they start to dig in, which is talked about there with those counterattacks that are coming. And I think he mentions it real quick here at the end.
Turn for this remarkable feat. Its men had suffered serious losses during their initial landings on the beach, which were dwarfed only by the casualties the Americans sustained on Omaha. However, the Canadians had fallen short of their primary objectives. Their failure to capture the Capiquet airfield in particular would soon prove to have been a costly mistake. By the end of the next day, powerful German reinforcements in the form of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, moved into the area, marking the start of a month-long bitter struggle which would not end until Capiquet was finally captured on July 9th.
So that last little bit there talking about the failure to take Carpe K, which is true. They don't take that objective. So how it's presented again, it looks like because they don't take Carpe K, con isn't taken, when it's supposed to. And again, depending on how you read this and read the primary documents, things like that, it didn't make a difference, right? The idea, supposedly from the get-go, is that Bernard Montgomery, in command of 21st Army Group and the land forces on D-Day, his plan was to have the German armor come in and hit these spots, right? Hold them in place or destroy them. So the Americans further to the west can move through, which turns out to be very difficult through those elements of the bocage, and take areas like Cherbourg and then whip around and come out. Can't do that if the tanks are stopping you. So the plan, which eventually does develop, what I believe anyway, is to hold them in place. So that is going to happen, right? If you take Carpe K, it doesn't make a difference one way or the other to keep the advance moving. If that's not your plan, then it doesn't matter. It's going to be static anyway due to the actions of the Allies and holding those positions to allow those armored reserves, 12th SS is one of them talked about there, there's a whole bunch more, coming in. So if you need to hold them in place, does it matter that you have that airstrip? If you present it in the way that it is in this video with saying Carpe K is stopping German German aircraft from operating, which it never was doing anyway, yeah, sure, that makes a difference, but that's not the case. I mean, Carpe K is attacked in early July, part of Operation Windsor. Only half of it's taken on the 4th and 5th, the town itself, and half the airfield, and the rest is taken for the push on Con with Charnwood. So yes, that part is correct. However, it's how it's presented is what I take issue with. It's making it sound like, again, they failed, and it's, stymies the Allied advance, so the Germans just are the ones holding them back. That's not the case if you are going to believe how it goes from the get-go, right? If you're from the school that Monty has this plan from the top, it should matter to you then if that's how it's going to go. If you're like me and believe that it comes later, which needs to be done one way or the other anyway, it doesn't make a difference. You have to hold position to smash these tanks. And the way that the order of battle of the 3rd Canadian Division is organized, with tons of artillery, I mean a lot, more so than normal, particularly with field regiments I talked about earlier, but also anti-tank units, you can see that that is the plan. Where the plan kind of comes from, again, is very unclear. But you can see that the order of battle shows that the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division is there to stop these armor attacks. And if you've ever been there, and I suggest you do go, Normandy's a great place to visit as a tourist, regardless, you'll see why. This place is wide open. Like, there's nothing stopping these tank advances. It's just wide open farmland, nice, gentle rolling hills. There is no bocage. Not like to the west. This isn't bocage country where, it's subdivided fields of pasture. This is cropland. It's wide open, tons of crops, still is. So you can move across this fairly easily, unless, of course, someone's trying to stop you. So that's what's going on here. They know the Germans are going to hit them with armor. They have to stop them. And this is where they know they're going to hit because there's nowhere else to go, right? So this is a big part of this. And I'll be talking about this a ton in the project. And if you'd like to support the project, I would really appreciate it through Patreon or YouTube channel membership. All of that helps me. I'm going in the spring next year to do filming and go to the ground and get that for everyone who's never been, get you a sense of these things that are not discussed a lot of the time. So if you want to support the project, that would be great. And thanks again for watching.